Good morning, dear friends. I want to thank everybody who joins us. It's a pleasure to see all of you in the Ukraine Media Center. My name is Olha Atamanova, and today we'll be talking about our power grid, its condition. We will be talking about different types of generation. We will discuss our forecasts for short-term future. So let me introduce our guests, the experts who joined us in our studio to talk about those important topics. So joining us in the studio today are Oleksandr Kharchenko, Director at the Energy Industry Research Center, Yurii Boiko, Advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, member of the Ukrenergo Supervisory Board. Also joining us is Zinchenko, Chairman of the Board of the Greencubator NGO, and Maksym Gardus, Communication Specialist at Razom. We stand. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We understand that this topic, the topic of condition of our power grid, is extremely important. The conditions that we all ended up in, the shellings, heat, the war, the power shutdowns, they all overlap all of the others, all other spheres of our life, just our everyday life plus economy. So let's talk about it, and I would definitely like to start with the current condition of our power grid. What is your evaluation? We were discussing it about a month, 2 months ago. We were discussing the situation, the forecasts back then. I remember back then the forecasts were such that there will be 10 hours of light during the day. This is what we were preparing during the winter time, but we're seeing the current situation. So let's discuss it. What are your predictions? So who's ready to start? So let me try to start, because I really remember very well our latest discussion, and it seems that there was no argument that July will be a repetition, a rehearsal of winter. And those predictions come true, more or less. So honestly, I would like to say that we under-evaluated some of the threats, because due to the heat, the situation is more complicated than it could be. I honestly hope that the winter will be just as warm. Well, maybe a little bit cooler, but still warm, and it will be a positive phenomena. Well, the situation is really very complicated, and on top of that, now we have the results of this effect when the distribution network and the mainway network were not built to use the maneuverable capacities. They are not designed to be switched on and off all the time, and it results in certain accidents and emergencies that happen, and they add tension to the overall situation. And because of this, there is a number of regions who had electricity like 4 hours per day within the last couple of days or couple of weeks. Unfortunately, in my opinion, about 3 to 4 weeks, there will be no significant improvements, not that I expected. Well, some of the reactors will be recommissioned after the scheduled maintenance. That's classified information. We don't really need to know it, but we may assume that some of the power blocks will be recommissioned after the scheduled maintenance, which will result in improvement of situation, but eventually by the last week of August, we will already start feeling this improvement of the general picture. It doesn't cancel out the degradation of equipment, emergencies, but still the situation is about to improve. And in my opinion, my colleagues are going to correct me if I'm wrong, but September and October will be positive in the sense that in case of good weather, the restrictions may be lifted off completely. I cannot predict it to 100%, because in my opinion, there are two key problems now that require urgent attention. First, we need to start thinking about what we need to do with the degradation of the network equipment, because next year this problem is going to catch up with us and it may be painful. And another problem is being discussed extensively. I hope that we just don't see those invisible people who solve it for us, but I mean the protection of the critical infrastructure with air defense capabilities. I hope the work is underway there, but we don't know about it. Thank you. Mr. Yurii, can you please confirm the predictions of Mr. Oleksandr? Can you agree with him? And another important topic that Mr. Oleksandr has touched upon is the defense, the protection. Do we have any information about this process going on and going on in an effective manner? Well, let's describe the situation a little bit. I mean, the situation that we are already through. Just back in May, the energy technicians who were understanding the real state of affairs, the real situation, who were understanding the scale of the maintenance programs, they were predicting that June, July will be the most difficult months. Unfortunately, July resulted to be even more difficult than we expected due to abnormal heat, and it just happened so that the peak of the scheduled maintenance fell on those days, on those hottest days of this year. Well, what we see as a result, it resulted in the predicted amount of power in the grid with increased demand, which resulted in its turn to increased deficit. Increased deficit led to more power shutdowns and more lengthy power shutdowns than we expected. I'm optimistic in terms of a short-term perspective. I'm more optimistic than Mr. Oleksandr. I hope that within a week, probably the situation is about to improve. Well, it could improve even today, but in the energy sector, there is such a phenomenon as cognitive effect. So in case of drastic fall of temperature, the consumption doesn't rise immediately, and the same may be applicable to the situation the other way around. And respectively, this delay element is about 3 days. And basically, today is the first day when the heat is about to subside, according to the forecast of our synoptics. And as we come closer to the weekend, usually the consumption falls. So I expect the restrictions to be lifted probably on Saturday. So one way or another, we will live under those conditions of rolling power shutdowns, but they should be more liberal, so to say, than they used to be within the last 2 weeks. Talking about the midterm perspective, our evaluations match. Basically, it's no different from our May's discussion and expectations. So in August and September, we are not supposed to have such an abnormal heat, but still a lot of sun, plus the scheduled maintenance is through its equator, and the balance within the network. By balance, I mean that some of the reactors are going for scheduled maintenance, some are recommissioned after the scheduled maintenance. And all those factors, they allow us predicting improvement of the situation in August, September, and respectively October, obviously depending on the weather and respective load on the power grid. Talking about the defense, and lately there were a lot of statements, many of them were of manipulative nature, and my opinion in this regard was already stated by me. So first of all, if we talk about the defense program that was implemented upon the decrease of the government, I mean the protection of the Ukrenergo facilities. In my opinion, that's an absolutely right step. And let me tell you so, if the cost of protective structure is equivalent to the cost of automatic transformer, and in case of those works that Ukrenergo performs, or they are even cheaper, my logic is just as simple. The first Shahed that hadn't achieved the transformer costing more than 100 million hryvnia, well, first it justified the existence of the protective structure and ensured the capability of the transport infrastructure of Ukraine operated by Ukrenergo to ensure the consistency of the power grid and transferring large amounts of electric power from one region to another. And in my opinion, it's a key factor of the stability of the power grid operation. Well, definitely this recipe doesn't work for generating capacities like large power plants due to their huge size. And there the key element, the machine room where the electric power is being generated, it's a real big structure that cannot be protected by some engineer solutions against drones or missiles, even against the drones, let alone the missiles. So basically the only type of defense for those types of facilities are the reinforcement of our air defense. And it goes beyond my competence, for example, because talking about the restrictions, I can give all the necessary answers, but talking about all the military defense, I cannot give any comments in this regard because I just don't know. Hopefully the statements by my colleagues, hopefully they are heard by the God and we get another level, next level protection thanks with the air defense capabilities. The defense not only of our power grid, but also our gas transportation infrastructure. Do we understand it correctly? If we not have a capacity to protect those facilities, the situation may deteriorate. Well, it's a rhetoric question. Of course, unconditionally, I'm saying, and I will continue saying, so the energy technicians work 24/7 in absolutely dedicated manner. Everybody who is aware of this information, they see the pace of reconstruction of our power grid facilities destroyed by missile and drone strikes. They will absolutely confirm what I'm saying, but the results of the work of energy technicians may be absolutely neutralized by the absence of defense. So the air defense of facilities like this is a mandatory precondition for normal passing of winter season. And in this sense, I think that July was not a rehearsal of the winter. My expectations of the situation for this winter are way higher in case there are no new damage and destruction, because the pace of reconstruction is within the schedule. People reconstruct everything they can, and we already have the cases when, from the point of view of some logic and physics laws, things seem to be impossible, but people just make miracles. I would like just to take my hat off in front of them. And let me add just a couple of words to what Mr. Yurii has just said regarding the works that are currently underway. Well, look, according to the standards of an average European company, the work that we're discussing takes 9 months. According to the Ukrainian standards, pre-war standards, we would like 5 to 6 months. now they do it within 5 to 6 weeks. Our colleagues who keep coming and seeing the pace of reconstruction works, it's not like they don't believe it's real. And on top of that, you see such things like strikes, road blockades. Well, my friends, I think that in the society there is not enough information now that would confirm that such works are underway, and the maximum efforts are taken by all those who are involved in those works, because I see such a demand on part of the society, and not everybody really understands that we repair, maintain something, we reconstruct something, and at the same time there are statements heard from government officials who say that we should live without air conditioners or something like that, and it gives such an understanding that instead of looking for ways to solve the situation, we're preparing our population like to such situation that we've made it someday, so let's continue living like that. So yeah, that was one of the reasons, because we responded to your invitation. Well, the reconstruction of the power grid, is going on in a Maidan regime, so to say. Well, there is an equipment stuck in the customs. The head of the local military administration finds the head of the customs. They find the personal point of contact. It really happens in Maidan mode, when people try to find horizontal links that never existed before. Well, it probably may not be correct institutionally, but this is how it happens. Well, we know that our country usually survives thanks to the horizontal links. Well, Mr. Roman, what is your estimation of the situation, and what is your forecast? What are your predictions? Well, horizontal links are a huge task for transformation of our power grid, because in many cases our power grid is hyper-centralized, and it results in effect when a lot of generating capacities cannot work for their region, because the dispatchment system doesn't allow them work in the local areas, ensuring uninterrupted supply of the power over there. Well, I think that due to the results of the Russian shellings, we will come up to implementation of dynamic networks and other technological solutions. So basically, the network needs every kilowatt, not even megawatt, but kilowatt. And this kilowatt may be coming from municipal cogeneration, or it may be a kilowatt from the solar power station installed on the roof of a structure. So ideologically, it would be important, interesting, and a new task. And talking about the sentiment, well, I'm optimistic because we have time to prepare, because climatically August and September provide us with a softer, so to say, opportunity to have less of a temperature stress and respectively less extreme consumption. But for businesses, for communities, for the citizens who understand the level of their dependency on power supply, for them, the law that was voted by the parliament allows them to unblock the logistics for smaller power equipment, because we all understand that a lot of suppliers were keeping the machines with the generators, batteries, and other equipment waiting for VAT to be lifted. And the market saturation will result in effect when those inverters and batteries will be more affordable for the society, for the public. And 2 months is a sufficient term for everybody to bring the distributed generation to their life, because in any case, after this destruction that the Russian military inflicted on the Ukrainian power grid, rolling power shutdowns are here to stay. They are here to stay not for months but for years. I want to believe that the positive scenario is possible, but I just remember the periods of construction of our power generation facilities, and it's not like about month, it's about decades. So Tripilla thermal power plant was being built for 10 years, and our biggest chance now is to have new players invited to our market. And on top of reconstruction of the existing giants, we will see a lot of small energy companies that will be working in the regional markets, or they will be the suppliers of a larger groups. But again, August and September is the ideal time to prepare, because hope is a good thing, but it's a bad strategy. I completely agree with you, Mr. Maksym. The floor is yours. I agree with Mr. Roman regarding the fact that we need to support the building of horizontal links, and we see that now a lot of small and medium-sized businesses and even specific individuals are working not only on improvement of their power supply but also on production of something. And there is a number of barriers in this way that the state is removing, but they're removing those barriers not as quickly as we would like to. For example, it's only now that we've started the discussion, for example, how can OSBB sell something to the grid if they generate something. My colleague is building the solar panels, and starting from May, they cannot get the documents to be able to sell the power to the common grid. So we have two projects going in parallel. Reconstruction of the giants is something that the government is in charge of. It requires a lot of expenses. The support of international foreign donors, our foreign partners, and the role of the civil society here is not as big. And talking about small and medium-sized generation, everybody can get involved, but first we need to remove the administrative barriers for connection. Well, basically we have to reinforce the fight against Ukrenergo, because it's not cooperation. In the majority of cases, it's a fight, and we have to improve the financial conditions to make sure that more people can do it. Yeah, the big banks, they've signed a memorandum that they will support the procurement of such equipment. The biggest bank, well, not the state bank, but this bank managed by the state, Privat Bank. Well, it's not a state bank. It's just a bank that belongs to the state. Also, there are programs in Oshad Bank, but they're not still sufficient, and they are not fast enough, because look, the 22nd of June is already behind us. We're closer to the winter. We have to remove the barriers. It's good that VAT was lifted, and immediately the discussion has started with the Energy Association, who said, like, okay, the wind turbines, why do we forget about them? Hopefully it will be done quickly. It's not a matter of a discussion for the parliament. I mean, I haven't seen any discussion around it. Everybody was pro. Everybody was supporting it, and hopefully they will rectify this problem soon. And on top of that, we have to expand the government programs in order to support the establishment of the divided generation. Okay, thank you very much. We have a lot of questions. Let's do it real quick so we make it in time. So let's talk about the generation. First of all, nuclear generation. You've mentioned that now is the period of scheduled maintenance. Well, then this period is about to end according to the plans. So according to your estimates, the question number one, will this nuclear generation be sufficient to cover our needs? And another question regarding the renewable power. What are the amounts of energy that we can expect to be generated by the renewable power sources? Well, as to the sufficiency of nuclear generation, if you remember the structure of electric power generation and the physical restrictions of the generation capacities in terms of regulation, we remember that nuclear generation works in a basic mode, so to say, with permanent load or permanent amount of generation of electric power, and respectively they fulfill specific tasks, the coverage of the basic load. In the same way, thermal power plants work with this standard load, and there is certain amount of load on those thermal power transportation capacities that need to work 24/7 to ensure the technological processes in the power plants themselves. And in that way, we have certain amount of generation which fulfills the tasks on coverage of the basic load, and there is a maneuverable generation. The same thermal power plants, hydraulic power plants, and hydro accumulation power plants. Well, the wind power plants, like they work in the same way as solar power plants. When there is wind, there is power. When there is no wind, there is no power. But the task of the nuclear generation is to cover the basic load again. And what I want to say is that according to the plans based on the analysis of the maintenance campaign, the maximum of the reactors, I mean all of the available reactors available in 3 nuclear power plants in the territory under Ukrainian control, they will work during winter at their nominal capacity, basically at the maximum that they are capable of generating. Will it allow us to avoid power shutdowns? Definitely not, because the level of basic load is way higher than the maximum that can be generated by nuclear generation. And on the other hand, there is a need for coverage of peaks. So basically, if we talk about the coverage during winter period, we need to have all of the types of generation at hand available to us. Hydro generation that depends on hydro resources, and it has a seasonal nature. For example, during the flooding season, the hydro generation generates 4 times as much as during absence of flood. So, okay, what amount is it going to give us? So talking in specific numbers, in the month of July, the deficit during certain hours was more than 2.5 gigawatts. According to our estimates, an average, statistically average winter, well, because it all depends on the temperature, we'll understand it. So the amount of deficit will be significantly less than we had within 2 to 3 weeks of July, about 1.5 thousand. And at the same time, we continue an active maintenance campaign in hydropower plants and thermal power plants. It's not a matter of days, but again, there are maintenance plans, maintenance schedule, and also we developed the corridor for import of foreign electric power from abroad. This corridor is currently 1.7 gigawatts. I cannot predict what will be the amount that we will be able to negotiate for winter, but there are preconditions for this corridor to be expanded. Mr. Oleksandr, do you agree with such estimates? Well, I can agree to part of it. but there are issues. Talking about nuclear generation, the problem of Khmelnytsk is not yet resolved. 400 megawatts of generation don't work there for the last 2 years. For the last 2 years, Ukraine doesn't have those 400 megawatts in their system that Ukraine could definitely use. And there were people's deputies trying to solve it, and there was a lot of hassle around it, but the matter was still unresolved. Unfortunately, no news were heard about any reconstruction of that capacity. However, many specialists think that Turboatom could have solved this issue in case they have time. Also, we will depend on expansion of import and to what extent we will be able to fill this capacity. For the time being, we are unable to fill even what we've got for today. 1.7 is not filled 100%. There are problems in the regulation of market, and as long as those problems are not resolved, the import will not be filled to 100%. We have 2 gigawatts of deficit now. The market is at the lowest level of prices restricted by regulation agency, and commercial regulation and physical absence of electric power, they don't correlate. We have deficit everywhere, and we cannot sell it, and we cannot get money for that. That's a paradox. And the regulator should continue staying in their offices until they solve this issue, because it restricts import, because meanwhile the electric power in Ukraine is cheaper than import from abroad. No one wants to import, and it's a problem. And another problem is security plus security, and another time it's a problem of security of generating capacities. Ukrenergo has done their homework professionally and in a quality manner. Talking about generating capacities, we just don't know, and I can only continue urging all parties involved. Dear sirs, please pay attention to the protection and security of the generating capacities. We will use our best efforts to reconstruct them, but in 2 weeks they might be destroyed. I don't want to read those messages in the morning which generating capacities were destroyed during the last night. Thank you. I completely agree with Mr. Oleksandr. Definitely security is a fundamental issue. As the programmers say, priority number 0. And there's yet another thing that I'm concerned about in this security dimension. When we talk about the stimuli for cogeneration, for the new cogeneration, somehow we only talk about gas cogeneration, and I always ask myself, where do they get this confidence that there will be gas? So we're talking about the complex ecosystem that is being threatened by a complex and dangerous enemy. And who says that enemy was not eyeballing the key gas distribution stations? And talking about other bottlenecks that we have, I see 4 key restricting factors due to which many positive changes may not happen. First factor, well, security is a 0 factor. It's fundamental. So first factor is regulations, really legislative background by method of expedition of, such a boot expedition with a boot of reality. The regulations started advancing, but it's still conservative, and it's aimed at Soviet model of hyper-generation. It's not about side management, work with the consumers, and so on. So first thing is the legislation. Second is access to funding. Basically, if we talk about innovations in the energy sector, The technologies are already available to us. They are available on a global scale. We cannot invent a wheel. The wheel is already there. We need a monobank for procurement of the new wheels. We need to make sure that the communities or families in 3 clicks may generate the application to have the equipment installed and a loan extended in a transparent loan scoring system. Another third bottleneck is logistics. Basically, people who could import batteries and inverters to Ukraine, they would be worth not only billions but monuments. Unfortunately, logistics is quite restricted, and the automobile logistics of all this equipment is real difficult. I don't know the situation with the ports, but according to the information that I have, less equipment is coming through the ports than through those roadways through Ukrainian-Polish border. And another fourth challenge is the people, the personnel. They are of deficit in all sectors, both in energy sector that is being built and even repairs of the classical power grid. Talking about decentralized generation, companies already are getting applications for October, November. They are completely loaded with tasks for today, training, retraining, requalification. Those are the new tasks that arise in front of us to invite more experts to the sector. For example, I'm in line, in queue for the replacement of a counter. In DTEC, it only takes a month. You know, a basic operation, replacing a counter. It takes a month. Well, talking about the generation, I cannot help but ask you, what about a loud statement by the president that was addressed to our foreign partners that we promise to reconstruct 1 gigawatt of generation by winter? As experts, what's your estimate? Is it real, and how can it influence the situation during wintertime? Well, let me try to start, because it's a creative thing. You know, what does it mean, a gigawatt? What does it mean it will appear in Ukraine? Well, I hope that it means that this gigawatt is going to be made available for use by population. Well, and if we're talking about the reconstruction of capacities damaged and destroyed by the enemy strikes, so it will result in the renewal of more than 1 gigawatt. And if we talk about the newly imported and installed equipment, so the answer is no, and I'm confident about it. Well, any other thoughts about it? Well, look, it depends on how you calculate it. It's difficult to calculate all of the facilities, the construction of which was already started but which were not commissioned. Well, basically from scratch, within 6 months, you cannot build a wind or solar power plant worth of hundreds of megawatts. But we still have unfinished projects, and some of them may be finalized by winter, some of them may not. We have a lot of plans for cogeneration and undersupplied generators. Well, they are not huge. It's like tens of megawatts. And in case all of them, everything that was showing up in the press releases, if they will be connected to the grid for the winter, it will result in hundreds of megawatts. But in order to do this, we need to remove the financial, logistic, and human resources barriers. Well, talking about personnel, by the way, the Ministry of Digital Transformation promised that there will be a booking mechanism used in the energy sector, and those power technicians who are about to repair everything with their own hands. We need those people who will work on that equipment, and they don't really work in huge government companies. They work in small energy companies, and there is no booking mechanism. We have some options in amount of hundreds of megawatts in those finalized, non-finalized projects. Some of them may be finalized by winter, some may not. Again, well, Mr. Yurii, a couple of state giants, Ukrenergo, Ukrnaftogaz, Ukrtransgaz, have started the projects with a total capacity of more than 1 gigawatt. Not significantly, but higher. On top of that, just recently we had a meeting with Bank, initiated by Ukrpravda, where they stated that their bank alone supports the projects capable to generate 500 megawatts of maneuverable generation. So basically a lot of projects were launched, but I'm quite conservative in my estimates in terms of dynamics of their development, and my forecast is that we should expect to see the boom of distributed generation construction next year. I don't know what percentage will be finalized by the end of this year. Well, by the beginning of this year, that will be not a significant percentage, but their chances may improve. And still, we should expect for the boom in the next year. So it's all about logistics, pace of implementation of the project, their own experience that will make them review their priorities in implementation of those projects, because the winter problems, they will exist one way or another under any scenario, and they will definitely change the people's attitude to this problem. And the economy will be one of the priorities, one of the criteria based on which the final decisions will be made. But it will also ensure the guaranteed power supply. That's why for the next year, I hope that we will cross this indicator of 1 gigawatt multifold, but the availability of 1 gigawatt by the end of this year is quite an ambitious task. Dear friends, if we have any questions on the floor, I can see there is somebody in the first row. If I may, just a small comment. Let me just give you one statistical figure from the first season of the missile strikes on our power grid. Then, when Russians were striking not the generation but the key distribution nodes, the transformer substations, our energy hubs, so to say. After that, the Ukrainians, as citizens, as the businesses, imported energy equipment of different types. Some lousy generators worth of 1 kilowatt worth 45 hryvnias, and Ukrainians imported the equipment worth of 1.5 gigawatts of capacity. I think that now, well, after this summer, yeah, there is yet another dimension of this energy revolution, something that is happening behind the meter, something that national committees don't see, something that is not seen in the official statistics because it was imported as private property. But I think 0.7, 0.8 gigawatts will be imported by the citizens and the businesses, because we were talking about intermittent renewables, and now we're in the era of intermittent grid, and it's here to stay. The network will be operating like this for some time. Mina Voskina interfax Ukraine. I'm having a question to Mr. Boiko. How did it happen that VAT for import of equipment was not lifted earlier? And I understand it was a government draft law. And what are the signals? Is the situation going to improve? Well, basically, the lifting of VAT for an energy equipment is one of a number of steps that were taken by the government and the parliament to ensure favorable conditions for the development of the distributed generation segment. I frequently visit the regions and I was a part of many changes, and my estimate is that all of the reasonable suggestions that I've heard from the market, they are being implemented. I'm confident that there is a number of factors also that should be solved as well, but they cannot be formulated so far. Not like, let's just make it so that the things are good. We should transform this phrase into something tangible. What exactly should we do to make things better? So facilitation of connection to the electric grid, to the gas distribution network, to the construction of the power plants themselves. For example, when they can start constructing without procurement or lease of the land, only based on a letter of recommendation from the head of the military administration. Also, there was a number of relaxing measures for the banks that ensure the facilitation of loans extension. The government has also developed a number of steps that are supposed to start working now, because I doubt that when you click something on the computer and the solar power just comes to you on the very next day, it never happens. So we understand the objective reality that my colleagues were mentioning. Obviously, there are problems with human resources. I mean, those who will physically install those solar panels on your roof. And yes, I completely agree that we should facilitate, first of all, the access to the information for the public so they can make use of this program. And look, for the public, for the population, zero interest loan for the medium-sized business, 100 or up to 100 million hryvnias, the 579 loans for big businesses, more than 10 megawatts, the loans at 14% interest below the discount rate. The difference, the cancellation of VAT is just one of the steps, one of these tools of the whole tool set that are aimed at creating more favorable conditions in this market, in this segment. Talking about the wind power, I was not hearing all of pros and cons at the parliament, but the goal was to stimulate some very specific things. For the time being, given the existing legislation, the existence of VAT for import of this power equipment, energy equipment, the wind power business is quite attractive, and I'm not sure that we should deprive the budget of VAT in case of those operations that are profitable one way or another. We understand it's a capex project. We can build solar power plant of some small nominal, expanding the circle for potential investors. And talking about the wind power, the capacity of the generating unit was improved and the entrance threshold became a little bit higher, but it's still interesting. The price in the market is above the green tariff. So my question is, should we stimulate everything or should we use intellect approach in this process? I think that we should use intellect, and we we should implement some regulatory softness, some easing too. So have we made use of this reduction of the government procurement or discount for government procurements per 1 billion hryvnias? Well, according to my information, we don't export any coal so far, but even taking into account this fact, I think that this way should have been opened to influence the situation with the proficit of coal in the market due to the damage of the coal power plants. So is this still used by the businesses? I mean, that's a whole different question, and it requires additional study, but such gate should have been opened. And well, let's be honest, nobody needs our coal. Just let's understand it and let's start thinking from this standpoint. The coal of that quality available in Ukraine is not of interest to anybody in this world. Talking for the program for small communities, how many communities were able to use it? There is the Energy Efficiency Fund, and you need to submit the application over there. Mr. Lorenzo, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for the very topical subject. I'm Lorenzo Cremonesi from the Italian daily Corriere della Sera from Milano. So I have three questions. Two are very short. One is how much, we see different figures in the last months, how much of the national energy of Ukraine is green energy, produced by green sources. And secondly, how much at the moment come from Europe, how much is imported from Europe. You can see, because I saw different figures in the last months, I don't understand. But then I have a third question, which is more complicated. And the question is, we understood that the first year, the Russian bombed mainly distribution system. Lately, they bombed productions, generators, power stations, apart the atomic one. In any case, they hit the distribution system near the power station. So is the solution that you are thinking about is the delocalization, means you have little generators all over the country, different kind of generators, for neighborhood, for city, for the villages, different generator for villages, etc. And also a system of a grid, a system of distribution which is more local. Then if someone hit the regional transmission point, the region is not in blackout. Thank you.
Let me start, and maybe colleague will then update what I will deliver. First of all, about CO2 neutral power generation. We even joking sometimes that Ukraine have stressed decarbonization of energy system. Because after all this attack and damages and destroyed coal generation, now we have more than 85% of our energy system CO2 absolutely neutral. It means nuclear, it means hydro, it means sun, it means wind. All together, 85% of our generation right now is a CO2 neutral. We hope that we will restore some carbon emission generated units before winter time, and maybe in winter time balance will be another. But I'm talking about what we have right now, more or less. Next question.
Import.
Import, maybe пане Юрію, про імпорт.
Well, I was recalling the maximum amount of import in amount of 1.7 gigawatt. And within the last 2 to 3 weeks, it was filled to its 85% capacity. But what I need to say, Ukrenergo was trying to fill that section specifically during the peak hours, And in fact, the feeling of this overlap was even more than 1.7 gigawatts. And there was another question about delocalization. Are there solutions like that?
I say 80% at 80%.
Is imported, 85.
No, 80%.
No, I said to 80.
1.7 gigawatt.
So can I ask you just very simple, how much of your total energy is imported?
Все, я зрозумів.
Yeah, it's clear now. Well, let me calculate. Let me tell you. In average, we may state about maybe 15 to 18%. I mean, for what I understand, I was thinking you were asking how this import section is being used, but in percentage is 15 to 18.
Sure, it's harder to hit, and that's important for many cities, for many communities to build it as soon as possible. There were some significant regulatory bottlenecks on this way. Now they are luckily mostly resolved. So the cities that own their CHP stations, they are capable to produce local electricity and distribute it locally. The big task now on this way is in the grid transformation, because as Oleksandr mentioned, rapid decarbonization, we are also undergoing the rapid innovation cycles, creative destructions according to Schumpeter, and we need to implement some of the steps way quicker than we expected. So Ukraine inherited very centralized, hyper-centralized system of grid management. And the model you're referring to, the decentralized generation, requires the transformation of the local grids, the transformation of the DSO's grids into a way to be smarter and able and enabling so-called energy islands. The people in the energy sector do not like the reference to the islands, but still energy islands might be the good solutions to many cities that own the local grid production. But first, they need to implement the new elements, how the grids circulates energy locally or integrates into the national grid well. That's essential. And yes, not all the aspects can be efficiently managed through the hyper-centralized. So getting into microgrids and smart grids can be good solutions to enable more and more local generation serving local communities.
Дякую. У нас майже не залишилось часу. Є останнє питання.
Thank you. We have one last question, and we are almost out of time.
Rita Kvist, I'm from the Danish radio. This is not a technical question, but more on a human level. From what I see now, I experience that the Ukrainians are very good at adapting to the situation. That you try to wash at night and to serve a menu without light and so forth. But in the wintertime, how severe is this situation? How threatening is it on a human level? And talking about elderly people maybe alone on floor number 28 or in a small village, will you have internally displaced people like energy refugees in Ukraine?
Якщо можна, хтось коротко.
Very important point. One of main focus in everything related to energy now focused on critical infrastructure and covering of heating, fresh water supply and sewage. And I'm more or less sure that all these elements will be well operational in winter time as well. Because of both national and local and municipal level effort to do this, and I can see how much is already done and how much projects focused on optimization of safety of critical infrastructure are going right now, and they will be finished. A lot of them will be finished before winter time. That I'm more or less sure that on municipal level, on city level, we will have fresh water, we will have sewage operational, and we will have heating everywhere. Next level is multi-apartment building. It's still a point. Many condominiums, OSBB we name it, many municipal power authority working to equip multi-apartment buildings of reserve capacity for their internal pumps, which will be able to push water and heating through the internal building system. This is a very important aspect. It has to be done in as many buildings as possible, and both condominiums and municipal managed buildings go into this direction as well in many, many, many points. Not all of them, but many of them. And last layer of this safety and defense system, it's a personal apartment level. And I can see now how small business of installation of battery storage and small energy equipment, which will serve for one separate apartment as a backup in time of restriction of power supply, it's really fantastic. It's really growing week by week in times. And now some traders say that Ukraine already imported all inverters on 358 kilowatt level from whole Europe. Netherlands, Italy, Spain, everywhere. It's moving to Ukraine, as well from China. That this direction also, I could say, running fast. And all this together give me some feeling, some understanding that many of Ukrainians will be ready for hand winter. And we will have enough punkt nezlamnosti, as we say it, like a point of standing, whereas people will have access to electricity even in bad case scenario and worst case scenario. That I think we do quite significant job to prevent any real technological disaster and real problem for citizens in Ukraine in general. Both national, municipal, and personal level. Many Ukrainians work on personal level for this direction very hard.
Дякую вам за цю розмову. Хочу подякувати всім.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I want to thank all of the panelists, all of the journalists for their interest. That's a really important topic, and I want to ensure you we will continue inviting experts in this sector. We will continue this conversation, and we will keep track of all of the changes taking place in this sector. Thank you very much. We continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.